Alright guys, so I am going to make my first ever response video to Yama Killer. You see this one dislike here? That's me. So basically, um, Captain Dumbfuck over here made a video. It's literally called "Why Control Should Never Be Tier 1," and I'm going to rip this video apart in very thorough detail. Um, it is going to be like this. I'm just using the Streamlabs. I'm not very good with the whole video thing, and honestly, I'm busy and I don't care to be that good with it. So we're just gonna do it this way. I'm gonna watch this video. I'm gonna pause the video and interject my points, and hopefully I will convert at least some people. Probably not, because most people hate control decks. So that's whatever. So we're gonna blow this up, and yeah, let's get into this. And bear in mind that this man has several videos on his YouTube channel where he plays the so-called best control deck of all time that was super easy to play and super oppressive. Oh, fucking crackheads outside. I hate crackheads. Anyway, and he gets his ass kicked because he sucks. All right, let's get into it.
Hey guys, Yama Killer here.
Fuck you.
Back again with another, slideshow presentation. The series is continuing. Been a couple weeks off, but we're back.
This may or may not be illegal. Let me go ahead and get. I don't know how YouTube works. I'm not monetized, so I think I can fly with it. We're just gonna go with criticism, I guess. Let's do it.
Meat of the content.
Yeah, let's get into
that. That is like, okay, you are going to a tournament and you expect this is the deck to be played. This is the deck.
He's just explaining what a tier 1 means. Whatever.
We all know what also a tier, what a control deck that I think is healthy for the format, and I think that is good for the format to be.
Blah, 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 blah. Shut the fuck up.
Getting over the top.
Because nothing quite as inspiring as these bad boys. Oko. The gameplay with Oko was actually really, really good. I'm just going to say this right now. It was super grindy, super interactive. The decks that Oko incurs was fantastic. After the looting ban, it was amazing. The problem with Oko is that you had to play it and everything. That was the problem with Oko. Uro didn't have that problem. Only control decks played Uro. All the control decks played Uro, but control was dog shit without Uro. Control was dog shit without Oko. And actually, pure control with Oko was still bad. The decks that were good with Oko were Wurza. That was the best deck. And then Bant Stoneblade. Not really a control deck. It was more of a mid-range deck. And then, oddly enough, Jund. Actually, Moist Jund had better results than a straight control deck with Oko. I mean, it was still good. But the gameplay with Oko was pretty good compared to the linear, monotonous bullshit that has always dominated Modern up to that point. Oko was good. The problem with Oko, it was too good, and everybody played it. I don't count Infect playing it because Infect has always played some type of non-Infect sideboard threat. They just play the best one that they had. They used to play Tarmogoyfs and Kitchen Finks, for fuck's sake. And what Infect plays in its sideboard doesn't matter. They're just trying to play through hate. Uro did not have the impact of Oko. Let's
coming the best decks of the formats, and usually they go in more controlling shells because they accrue advantage over a long period of time. So, what is what more do you want for a control deck than some of these broken threats? And so, what does a tier 1 control deck look like? I think there's a few different things that go into a tier 1 control deck. And the first,
yes, okay, he's gonna explain this. Win conditions. We don't fucking need win conditions. Everybody who's good with the archetype knows this. I mean, if you have one, yeah, you stick it in there. Jace, Teferi, Uro, doesn't fucking matter. You want to draw cards and have more cards than your opponent, and then eventually you'll win. Answers that are both broad and good. Yes. This is really what we need here. The problem is the threats in Modern are so goddamn good, and then the answers just cannot keep up. Okay? Attempting to go to the mid and long game is not an option. No, because you're trying to kill me before I can do anything. And you're going to do that whether or not control is good. So why is it a problem if a control deck has the ultimate end game?
It's win conditions that are hard to interact with and take over the game. Among which I just said, Oko, Uro, sometimes it's Jace the Mind Sculptor. Okay. Usually Planeswalkers are permanents that accrue loads of advantage both quickly if they're dealt.
Shit that's hard to kill because that accumulates card advantage. theoretical card advantage, pseudo card advantage, because you're blanking your opponent's interaction when they do bother to play it. And up until very recently, decks just fucking weren't playing it.
With, it takes usually a 2-for-1, if not more than that, and sometimes
and that's totally fine.
Are
That's totally fine because they just play their monkey on turn 1, and if you don't kill it, you basically lose because it generates that kind of insane value. When the 1 drops out value pretty much everything else, there's a fucking problem.
Trading down on mana or trading down on cards, especially to deal with these, and they're not traditionally interactable with or hard to interact with without them.
One thing, I'm going to be doing this video from the perspective of the format now. You could argue, and I have said this, and you can go on any channel that I've frequented, I've said that 4-color control was too much. The reason 4-color control was too strong back then is because it had too much resiliency. I have played that deck. I've been boiled twice in a game, multiple games, and I've come back from that because Renin 6 is ridiculous. I've been hit with Ashiok and Boil. You come back from that because you're not relying on Uro anymore. You have Omnath, which was insanely powerful. People undersell how good Omnath was. People were playing too. I played the full 4 Omnath. That card was insane in the deck. It was absolutely amazing. People underplayed it for so long. So the deck was too resilient. And then you had Field of the Dead, which was the ultimate fuck you. That's what pushed out other mid-range and control decks. That deck was too fucking good. That deck would be too good now. I maintain that. If you unban Field of the Dead, that deck's a problem. Uro on its own is not a problem. Uro is easily dealt with. You kill the Uro player before they go off. You hit it with Path. You play some type of graveyard hate. Ashiok was a fucking nightmare for snow control. And then there's also Boil, which was a pain in the ass too. And now Blood Moon, without Astrolabe, which I don't think ever should have been banned. You have Blood Moon. And most of the decks played right now are red, so Blood Moon will fuck them up pretty good.
Accruing enough advantage to really make it.
I'm going to skip this section because it just goes over what we do. This is what we do. You look at all my control decks, they all meet this criteria to the best of my abilities to do it. Every good control deck will meet those. This is a moot point. I don't know why he even bothered to mention this because every control deck functions like this. Now, here's a list of the old Miracles deck, which I have played with. It was after the ban, but I built it and played with people. And oh my god, this was a control deck.
Problematic parts to it that really made it so people really did not enjoy playing against this deck.
Again, he's going back to 2016, 2017. Keep in mind, in this format, you had so many combo decks. There really weren't control decks. This was the control deck because it had the answers and the ability to keep up with the insane combo decks. The Sneak and Shows, the Infects, whatever. This was the best deck in Legacy. This deck, interesting note, he makes it sound like it was so ridiculously overpowered. The only reason that Top was banned is because of stupid people. It's literally the only reason it's banned. If you go and look at the official announcement for Sensei's Divining Top being banned, it's literally because, I mean, they didn't say it quite like this. Ian Dukes, I guess, he's like fake nice, but he's a little bit nicer than I am. People were too slow with Top, and games went too long. So people who didn't know what the fuck they were doing played the deck, and they played it badly and made everybody miserable. That's understandable. I play against some idiots on Historic who don't know what the fuck they're doing with control decks, and I'm ready to beat my goddamn head off a wall because it takes them fucking 5 minutes a turn cycle. And it just pisses me off. I understand what it's like to play against bad control players, and I understand why Top was sadly banned, because stupid people don't know how to play it correctly in this type of deck. Mystic Sanctuary kind of fixed this, although bad players will still fuck up with Mystic Sanctuary. The problem with Mystic Sanctuary is it's not something that you can easily repeat like Top, so you can't repeatedly fuck it up. If you fuck up with your Mystic Sanctuary, you've lost the game, basically. I'm going to skip this part. This deck isn't relevant. It's been banned out for fucking years. So this deck doesn't matter. Everybody knows what it does. It had a lock. The counterbalance was a little bit annoying, but that was in the context of the format where everything costs basically 1 and 2 mana. If people had changed their decks around a little bit, I mean, counterbalance is a bad card.
Hard to stop because you couldn't deal with it through traditional.
Also, he does not cover Mystic Miracles here because that deck didn't really do much in Modern before Oko and Uro took over. Essentially, that deck never did anything. Mystic Sanctuary was a card that never should have been banned. It just made control a little more playable. So this is exclusively the old legacy Miracles. I am skipping this part. Miracles was not fun. He should also do a video on why dying on turn 1 and 2 is not fun, but he won't do that because he fucking loves those types of decks.
Forever and largely.
Okay, now we're gonna cover Uro Omnath. People did not stop playing Modern. People said they were gonna stop playing Modern, but if you go back and actually look at the challenges and all this shit, Modern was fucking hyped. Okay, biggest challenge numbers ever. Because I came back in April when it looked like Esper Control was a decent deck, and I'm like the challenge results were like the challenge numbers were like so low. I mean, they were about the same. They were a little bit lower on average. I mean, you can go and look at MTG top 8 and all this shit. But let's go over this deck. Uro, Omnath, Ren, the Planeswalkers. The problem with this deck, like I said, it's too resilient. Okay.
Playing Modern in my experience. I talked to a bunch of people during this time. I played a bunch of Modern during this time. And this deck was miserable to play against. You had...
Yeah, maybe. If it got to like turn 7, you definitely lost. But when the other decks are trying to kill you by turn 3, is that really a problem? I do think the deck was too good, but was it problematically too good? I don't believe that it was too good in the context that it just needed to go entirely. Because Hammer Time, second best deck during this era. The Luris aggro decks were right there, Prowess. And like those decks have very high win rates. Hammer Time outperformed this deck in terms of raw win percentage. Prowess outperformed this deck in terms of win percentage, but this deck was played more. This deck gets a bad rap because it's blue. I mean, it made Jund unplayable because Field of the Dead. But, I mean, it was a boring deck to play too. I don't actually miss this deck. I really don't. I mean, I played it. It was fun to, like, crush people. But it got boring real quick because the lines were always the fucking same. Okay. I'll let this go on a little
bit. Many quote-unquote fire cards. Ren and 6, Uro, Omnath.
And like most idiots on Reddit, he's misusing what fire actually is. There's like 2 articles about what fire is. And basically, fire is commons and uncommons. So your Infernal Grasps and your Considers and, Eliminates. They wanted to make limited better. That's what fire is. They wanted to make commons and uncommons more exciting. The big splashy mythics were something else entirely, but everybody represents what it is because they're retarded or they have an agenda. So
Force of Negation. These cards that
Force of Negation, it was a necessary card in the format. I don't know why he's complaining. You only complain about this card if you're doing something degenerate, or now something that was already degenerate. Cascade Living End gets to play it, and they use it and abuse it. So yeah. That's why. This card is completely innocuous.
That are just like, they accrue so much advantage and they're difficult to interact with, and they need so many specific different pieces of interaction. It was just like...
Yes, but the Hammer Time is trying to kill you on turn 2. Prowess is trying to kill you on turn 3. Tron will kill you on turn 3 if it gets the chance. I don't get the point. Why is it okay that Tron is inevitable? 1 + 1 + 1 = 7 to Yama Killer. That's cool. He doesn't talk about this at all. And never has. And none of these people ever do. But, like, that breaks the biggest fundamental rule of the game. And we've had to put up with that since 2011. I don't, you know what I mean?
Incredibly
the old Infect decks used to kill you on turn 2 because of how fucking potent Tron was. But Tron was never banned. So I don't get it. And it basically played out like this deck, but even more linear and more difficult to interact with. Yeah, it didn't have as many ways to attack you as this deck eventually got, but it was a lot simpler to set up, and it was a lot easier to play. As we've seen, Yama Killer played this deck several times and did fucking terrible with it. So this is not a brain-dead pile like Tron.
Fun, and even if you did try and interact with them, like, okay, I'm going to slow down the Uro, I'm going to slow down, the Planeswalkers, they could still just have Field of the Dead at the end of the day and win.
Yep, It's too resilient. As I already said that. I covered that real quick. It really was too resilient, ultimately. But was it too good? I'm still not sure if it was too good. I stopped playing the deck because it was boring. I went to Mystic Miracles with some Shark Typhoon sometimes because I thought that was a way more enjoyable experience.
And you have to deal with creatures, planeswalkers, lands. It's so many different things to deal with while they're also, have counter spells. They've got good removal spells. It's so many different things to deal with. So, it attacked from multiple angles, as I said.
Land. All right, I'm not even attack from multiple angles. Yes, it did that. Renin 6, Field of the Dead, Omnath, Uro. Literally in that order, Renin 6 was the engine of the deck. And then Field of the Dead, Omnath was better than Uro because you didn't have to play it for 3 and then do it later when you had cards in your graveyard. It was actually hard for that deck to get a lot of cards in its graveyard quickly, and most of the time you were not playing Uro from your graveyard until turn 6 or 7. You weren't actually casting Uro until turn 6 or 7. Whereas Omnath just cost 4 mana, gained you 4 life almost immediately, and would wall off pretty much most creatures that were played at the time. Omnath was underplayed in the decks. My deck was different than that list. I played the full 4 Omnath, and I maintain that people did it wrong. Omnath was so good in that deck, and I seem to be the only one who really gets how good Omnath was in that deck. But anyway,
and Field of the Dead, creatures in Uro and Omnath, planeswalkers in Renin 6, and Teferi and Jace. You also had one of the most awful experiences in Modern. Similar to Countertop, you had Mystic Sanctuary locked.
No. If you lost to this, you lost anyway. Most of the time, this just bought you some time, and you could spin your wheels. The only way you could really pull the lock out or off is with a non-interactive deck that couldn't do anything with you. You had to have Uro in play, or Teferi, or Jace. I mean, it was doable, but you just had better things to do. Because the lock doesn't accomplish anything. And I've literally seen people, including Aspiring Spike, fuck around with this so-called lock, and it cost them the match. Because they were just like, I need to get my Cryptic Command. No. The lock is shit. An interactive deck doesn't give a fuck about your so-called lock. You're not accomplishing anything. You're not putting yourself ahead. You're just barely treading water, basically, when you do this little lock bullshit that they talk about. Most of the time, what you did with Mystic Sanctuary was put Hour of Promise back on your deck, and you made more zombies, and then you killed your opponent. If you were fucking around with the lock and the 4-color control deck, you were doing it wrong. The lock was just kind of something that you could pull out of your ass. You did it for fun, basically. You did not lean on this to actually win a game, unless you're playing against Boggles, and they literally can't beat it. That's about it. This is a complete fucking myth. The Cryptic Lock almost never happened because it was a suboptimal play 95% of the fucking time. And anybody experienced with these decks will tell you that. I mean, it's a complete fucking myth. In the Miracles deck, you got Terminus back and Archmage's Charm to draw more Terminus and do that against the aggro decks. But even against an interactive deck, Miracles was good. I mean, if you were Aspiring Spike and Harry MTG, you fucked around with counterbalance like a dipshit. But that was the suboptimal way to play the deck. Yeah, I mean, it's a fucking joke. The Mystic Sanctuary Cryptic Lock is a complete fucking joke. It's a myth. And he says it's miserable to play against, but Hammer Time killing you on turn 2 literally is totally fine. I don't understand this.
Out where you could go Cryptic Command, counter your spell, bounce Mystic Sanctuary, replay Mystic.
I was struggling to stay.
Oh, you greedy fuck. Yama killer. Greedy fuck. Let me mute this shit. Sorry. Okay. Should have done it earlier before you got it monetized.
You put Cryptic to the top. I'm going to counter every single spell you have.
Yeah, I mean, it was one counter spell a turn. You weren't drawing new cards, so you actually ran out of cards, and your opponent could just overwhelm you, and then you'd die. It's a terrible fucking plan. It really is. It's actually just a fucking terrible plan that people were like, oh, the Cryptic Look. Idiots on Reddit drooled about how good it was, but you very rarely ever fucking did it. It's so stupid that people actually still bring this up. It was almost completely fucking irrelevant. Mystic Sanctuary outside of Miracles was not even that good. You played it in Miracles because you had the 1 mana sweeper, which was really good, and then you had Entreat the Angels as a like, I'm gonna win the game now. Fuck you. But yeah, the Cryptic Lock's a complete fucking joke. Most of the time, you got back Archmage's Charm
for the rest of the game. And with Uro out, I'm going to gain life. I'm going to draw those cryptic commands repeatedly, and I'm going to continue to just make sure that you.
Here's the problem with Uro's inevitability. Yes, Uro has inevitability, but so does Jace and Teferi. And Uro's easier to deal with because it dies to creature removal and it dies to graveyard hate. Literally, Ashiok Dreamrender tore Snow Control apart because the deck was built on Uro. And if you just had some graveyard interaction, the game was over. It's not my fault that people didn't want to play Ashiok in their fucking sideboards. Everybody tells the control player that they have to suck it up and adapt to the meta, but nobody else is ever willing to adapt to the control deck when there are definitely ways to do it. This is why, at the height of Snow Control, Jund was the second best deck. Jund post-sideboard had a 50-50 against Snow Control, if not even higher than that. Like, yeah, game 1, Snow Control beat Jund almost every time. It was like 7 out of 10 times Snow Control is going to beat Jund. Game 1. Games 2 and 3, no. It is so much closer. I would go so far as to say that if the Jund deck really wanted to, they'd be favored against Snow Control post sideboard. And then if you go and watch old Grimflayer and Ironworks MTG videos, they have a pretty good record against the Snow Control decks. So that's why Jund was the second best deck. And then you still had Hammer Time, and you had Lurrus Burn. People say Uro made Burn unplayable, but that's not it at all. Hammer Time and Prowess made Burn unplayable because they beat the shit out of Burn. Burn couldn't interact with those decks favorably. Burn beat up on these control decks pretty well, even with Uro's life gain. And again, MTG top 8, you can... People say Goldfish is wrong, but go look at MTG top 8. They have all the data from all the challenges. You see how well these decks performed. Even the 4-color deck, everything I say is backed up with actual fucking statistics. So go look at that. I don't know, no Reddit bias bullshit here.
You don't get to play the game. As I said, prison elements are something that is really continuing to happen in these control decks that are at the top of the top. You don't have any opportunity to get out from under them.
That's not true. Your opportunity is literally, oh, I'm going to kill you on turn 2 or 3, which those decks are doing anyway. It's not like, this is another common argument. Oh, well, the control decks force in fact, somebody replied to a comment that I made saying that I needed to understand why these aggro decks were created because the control decks were too good. No. Well, Modern has always been a linear, hyper-aggressive shithole format dominated by, I'm going to kill you as fast as fucking possible decks. The control decks just finally got the tools to be like, hold up a minute. No. And people were like, oh, fuck. What do we do? We can't adapt. We've had everything handed to us on a goddamn platter for the past 10 years. You expect us to adapt? We're just going to cry on Reddit like a bunch of man-children until we get our way. And that's exactly what happened. And Hammer Time now still, it's better than ever. It's the best deck in the format. Cascade Rhinos is arguably a bit better. Delver decks, Blue Red Murktide, whatever the fuck you want to call them. It's basically Delver. It's a spiritual successor to Delver. That's a thing. And then, oh god, Cascade Living End. A deck that is so goddamn brain dead and stupid. You just cycle cards and then you're like, I'm gonna Cascade and Living End and have a giant board. Ha ha, fuck you. Why is that cool? It's also resilient because it gets to play Force of Negation and pitch elementals and things like that to fuck with you. So why is that cool? Cascade is a horribly busted mechanic, but nobody complains about it. I don't get it. As I've said multiple times, when you force fair decks to play Chalice of the Void as a 4-of or lose horribly and even with 4 Chalice of the Void, they're probably still going to get their ass kicked. Your format is not healthy. Your format is seriously fucked up, and you need to fix it. But nobody is talking about it. Nobody cares. Nobody fucking cares, because control decks are basically dog shit. Nobody cares. So that's the problem. The format's actually homogenized now, by Cascade, Hyper Aggro, and the fucking morons still trying to play fair decks with Chalice of the Void. Like, the format's the worst it's ever been. I'll take the 2018 Dredge format over this. At least Rest in Peace put Dredge to sleep.
Once they get their lock going, and the lock happens relatively.
There's no lock. If you try Cryptic Sanctuary lock on turn 4, you're gonna lose every goddamn game, because what you're doing is you're never getting ahead on mana, you're never getting ahead on cards, and your opponent just grinds you down, and all you have is that cryptic command. This lock is complete fucking myth. And I thought Yama Killer was good enough to know that it was, but nah. He's just a fucking Reddit man-child scrub, apparently, who doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. You do not do this on turn 4. You die every fucking time you do this. It's absolutely the wrong play. It's terrible. People put way too much fucking stock into this. This is the biggest myth in all of Magic. This little lockout. It's a complete fucking joke.
Quickly. So, the guys for the decks, maximum fire.
Let's just play every color, all the best spells, maximum fire, Jund. It was a Jund deck. It's a modern Jund deck. That's all Jund does. That's what Jund does right now. Best cards, best colors, red, black, green, probably in that order. Yeah, I don't care. Decks always do this. These are moot points. None of this matters. This always happens in every format and every era. There's always a deck that plays the best cards in as many colors as possible, because being able to easily fix your colors is a huge advantage. Being able to play multiple colors is a huge advantage. This always happens. This is a completely moot fucking point. It means nothing. Dogs bark, cows moo, cats will claw you. This fucking doesn't mean anything. This is a ridiculous fucking point. We're skipping this. Oko Astrolabe. Astrolabe was fine.
Not necessarily a dig on control, but a dig on these cards that have been printed that have helped out control. But, there's also examples from the past, as I said, with Top and Counterbalance. But with Oko Astrolabe, mana was not an issue. It brought...
Okay, so there's like 3 other cards that are exactly Astrolabe in terms of mana, like what it does, what it costs to do. The only difference is that Arkham's Astrolabe drew you a card. That's literally the only difference. And you had to play specific lands. Like, that's the only difference. Arkham's Astrolabe is just a playable version of a card that's existed since at least Alara. With mana Silex. 1 mana, filters your mana. Same cost as Arkham's Astrolabe. Same fucking thing. Does the same thing. It just doesn't replace itself. This card was not overpowered. People are retarded. They're just stupid. But, I mean, all it does differently is it draws you a card.
Brought control. Before this, there was basically no control decks that were doing...
Exactly. There's no control decks that were doing well. Control had a brief period in Modern where it was good. When Death Shadow was everywhere, and Supreme Verdict and Path and Condemn were awesome, and then Fatal Push got printed, and it didn't really matter because Fatal Push was, you kick the Shadow off a cliff, that's fine. Okay. And then Hogak, because Hogak was basically an all-in combo deck that was like, I'm gonna kill you on turn 2, unless you have Force of Negation. Oh shit. Then you weren't doing that. In fact, some guy won a GP with blue-white control. It was a Doom Switch list, and he beat all the Hogak decks. But then Hogak became just a grindier dredge deck, and then control was not as good. And then it died because after Hogak got banned and looting got banned, Titan was the thing. Control was still kind of there, but it really started to fall off because it couldn't beat the Titan decks. And then Oko came out, and Control was somewhat decent, but it was the Urza artifact decks that were the shit. And then Control morphed into Stoneblade because it was getting bullied in a battle against the Urza decks. And that's what happened. And arguably, it's because Embry allowed you to play turn 2 Oko with Opal. Nobody talks about that. Nobody looks at Oko in the context of it being played in Stoneblade or Jund and be like, oh, this card was just too... No, everybody looks at the absolute best deck, which he doesn't actually cover. He looks at an early Bant Snow Control list, which was all right, but those decks folded to blue-green Urza pretty easily. That's why they became Stoneblade.
Doing well. And then Arkham's Astrolabe and Oko came out. Oko, one of the best planeswalkers of all time, incredibly controlling card.
I maintain that Oko needed a couple of... I think Oko's fine, especially now with all the Planeswalker hate. Oko's fine. What Oko does is slow enough that right now it's not going to be a problem. It shouldn't really be banned anywhere. Maybe Standard. It was too good in Standard. I'll say in Modern and Legacy it should be unbanned. It's fine. And now you're not going to convince me that it's too good. It would just be played by other decks. It wouldn't even be that good. It's the same problem with Uro now, right? If you unban Uro in Modern, the Cascade decks will just play it, and they'll get better, and it won't really help control decks that much. This is why I don't actually want an Uro unban. Not really. I want a Mystic Sanctuary unban because that only helps control decks, because the other decks are not going to warp themselves around Mystic Sanctuary.
Astrolabe, one of the best cantrips plus mana fixers all at once. It really, brought the deck up and really, made a lot of traditional control hate cards, like Choke, Boil, possibly some other cards that really restricted their mana at times was not present. So what do these decks all have in common, as I talked about? Prison Elements, Oko, Astrolabe. Oko is... Once Oko comes down, if you do not have an immediate answer, you're going to be slowly drained out.
And that's the difference. Slowly. You're going to be slowly beaten. Not instantly beaten. Not like, oh, my opponent killed me on turn 2 with Hammer Time. Or my opponent killed me on turn 3 with Prowess, or Infect, or Tron. No, it's slowly. You are slowly going to be grinded to a pulp. So you still have a chance at actually winning the game. If you are miserable and it's not worth your time, you can just concede. I don't understand why people are fine with the aggro deck or the combo deck killing you on turn 2 or 3, but cry about a deck that plays something on turn 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then they slowly have everything slip away from them. I don't get it. It's so stupid. It's such a stupid fucking argument. And these fast decks are fast anyway, because people apparently have the attention span of fucking chipmunks, and they don't actually want to play a goddamn game. It's not like these control decks pushed other decks to be faster. They didn't. They existed before. They exist now. They're everywhere. They completely dominate the format.
Card, your creatures don't matter, your permanents don't matter. Oko is the ruler of all. You got Counterbalance top, you got Mystic Sanctuary, Cryptic Command. These prison elements that just are not fun. It's not fun to get Chalice of the...
It's not fun to die on turn 2 because you didn't have your 1 mana removal spell in your opening hand. It's not fun to die on turn 3 because Karn. And I had to put up with that for ever. It's not fun to die to Grape Shot on turn 3. Or Ad Nauseam on turn 4. Or any of that shit that everybody conveniently ignores. It's only unfun when the control deck does something powerful on turn 4 or 5 and then eventually wins the game 6 turns later because you're too goddamn stupid to concede. Why? Why is that okay? You know what I mean? Why is it that way? You're terrible at the game, so everybody who enjoys a slower control strategy has to be punished for your ineptitude. And you people never bothered to try and tweak your deck to deal with any of this because it was a hyperlinear piece of shit. Oh, and there's the problem.
Void and Snaring Bridge, but while it looks different in Cryptic Command and Terminus and all these sweepers and counter spells, they feel the same way in that you think that you have a chance, but you really don't. Like you're not going to resolve a spell. You're not going to be able to get into combat. these things are going to stop you. It just doesn't quite look the same. People don't think of it the same way as, a Chalice of the Void and a Snaring Bridge.
If you're playing an interactive deck, you have a chance. This is why Jund was so good during the snow control meta and with Miracles. Because Jund is a highly interactive strategy. The only decks that this applies to are the linear, busted, disgusting aggro decks or the stupid combo decks. That's it. Those are the only decks affected by this. This is why I said Field of the Dead was too good, because it was to the point where you simply could not compete with it playing interaction. At that point, there were too many pieces that you had to interact with. And Field of the Dead was just absolutely crippling for any other fair deck that could not match it field for field. Even if they could, like the Primeval Titan decks, Primeval Field of the Dead with that little crop rotation elf dude. That was actually a fun matchup to play with 4-color, but 4-color just went way over the top of them because they had the Planeswalker. So even a busted combo deck like that abused Field of the Dead for months before the control decks did, couldn't match the control deck with Field of the Dead. And that's why I said Field of the Dead was definitely too much and definitely needed banned and should always be banned. That card was insane.
Trinisphere. But they are kind of the same in that they're prisoning you and they're...
No, they're not the same. Because the actual prison deck can tutor out his artifacts from the sideboard with Little Karn and then completely lock you out of the game doing that bullshit. Prison decks don't exist because they ultimately lack interaction and they get run over by the aggro decks. The control deck just kind of is like, I have counter spells. That's the difference. It has interaction. Prison decks don't really play interaction. They just try to stop you from playing the game. But they can't really back that up. So if you get a lead on them, they die. That's been Prison's problem forever. That's why Prison decks are terrible, generally speaking. Unless they can completely fuck you over with like an early Blood Moon or something. Once you get a board presence, you just die. That's why Prison decks are always terrible.
You do not get to play the game in the way that traditionally it is played.
Okay. Says the guy who slams Karn on turn 3 and has 7 mana by turn 3 and does all kinds of busted shit. Or plays the and I know Tron's not good right now, but it was for years. Okay.
Your removal spells don't matter. Your creatures don't matter. They're going to get removed and your spells are going to get countered. And this is going to happen to you relatively quickly in these decks because that's the goal of them. And that's why they're so good. They're going to make it so you don't get to play the game very, very quickly.
Right. So you don't get to play the game as quickly as possible. So you don't get to kill me by turn 2 or 3. And I'm going to drag the game out till turn 12 before you eventually concede or I beat you with a troop of angels or an Uro for the 12th time that I've escaped him. Whose fault is that? That's your fault for sitting there. Not my fault. If I have to accept the fact that you can kill me on turn 2 or 3, and I have to try to build my deck to beat your deck, then you can show me the same courtesy.
Push cards and Broken Synergy, as I said,
We're done with this. Why are these decks are too
mountain
much?
top, there's complex...
People like back and forth. No, they don't. This is complete bullshit. Since the inception of Modern, people have been building decks that killed you as quickly as fucking possible. People don't like back and forth. If people actually enjoyed back and forth, then they would recognize that Snow Control meta was the absolute best fucking meta that Modern has ever had. Because you had a highly interactive deck at the top, you had a highly interactive deck in second, and then you had a fairly interactive deck in Burn, and then you had the Prowess decks and the Hammer Time. And then you had the combo decks. Ad Nauseam was at an all-time high because it beat the absolute shit out of Uro Control, Snow Control. I know. That was a really tough matchup. That was the absolute most back and forth this goddamn format has ever fucking been. And I'm talking primarily about Modern. That's what I mostly played, and that's what Yama mostly plays. So, Snow Control meta was the best format because it was the absolute most interactive the format has ever been. It was the most back and forth. This crossing your fingers didn't fucking exist. You played on point or you died. You would get beat down, okay? But it was all fair. It was all interactive. It was grindy. That was the best meta ever. There's ever looming threats right now, but now they cost 1 mana and they don't have any downside of I have to have 5 cards in my graveyard to exile to get this out, which almost never happened on turn 4 anyway. Now they just cost 1 and they do literally everything Uro did anyway. Monkey generates mana and draws cards, but it costs 1 mana. Darcy filters the shit out of your cards and is a threat on its own. Cascade decks will just drop 10 power on turn 3, and there's not really much you can do about it unless you have a Chalice out. Cascade Living End will just drop a whole board by turn 3, and all they had to do was cycle cards. And then you just die to a horde of Sphinxes or whatever the fuck they brought back. Face roll cards, yeah. It's too easy to tear this shit apart. Face roll cards, yeah. Monkey, face roll. He's gonna fuck your skull. Hammer Time kills you on turn 2. Cascade kills you on turn 3. Living End kills you on turn 3, etc. I don't think I need to say any more.
Board states where you.
This is ridiculous. All of that exists right now, but it's way worse than it's ever been, and there's none of the interaction
In the metagame.
What these decks breed. The game gets out of reach, kill them on turn 3. Decks did that anyway. I've said this enough times. I have reiterated this point over and over and over again. Decks were always killing you as quickly as possible, usually by turn 3. That was the rule of Modern. Everybody who wanted to play a fair deck had to accept it. And I mean, that was why. For some reason, Splinter Twin was banned, even though that was a turn 4 kill. I don't. Pod was banned. Yeah, that was a grindy deck. Blowout sideboard cards always existed. Rest in peace. He mentions that it's different when it's one of those decks because it's all in combo deck. Go fuck yourself, Yama. That's a terrible argument. It doesn't matter. You've always had to have certain sideboard cards or you died. Affinity, the heyday of Affinity, Stony Silence, or you died. Dredge, rest in peace, or you died. The Mirror usually getting inbred and goes to time. That's not true. I very rarely go to time. Maybe if you're incompetent, you'll go to time with a control deck. But who cares? You're playing the deck knowing that that is a possibility. Who fucking cares? Nobody's watching it. The world was locked down for bullshit reasons. So, like, nobody was watching. Who cares? The only thing that this affects is these idiot streamers who play 8 goddamn hours a day. Like, Aspiring Spike, Captain Fatass, Squaw Chief, etc. Those people. This is the only people that this actually affects. These leeches who play the game 6 to 8 hours a goddamn day. This is the only people that this affects. This is a irrelevant point. If you go to a tournament playing a control deck, and it happens to be good, you understand that you may get into a mirror, and you may go to time. I have never played a control mirror that has gone to time. Never. Not one fucking time. Not in paper, not on MTGO, not on Arena, not in Standard, Historic, Modern, Legacy, nowhere. It's never happened. So I've only gone to time once, and it was because my Sultai Shadow player, who I normally beat the shit out of, refused to concede to Jace, and the game went down. And yeah, he was gonna lose, but he didn't want to. He just didn't want to give it to me that one time. So that's the only time I've gone to time playing a control deck. If you're going to time playing a control deck regularly, then you're a bad control player and you should play something else. And this, like I said, the Mirror usually getting inbred and goes to time doesn't affect anybody but these asshole streamers.
That is really, really bad.
It's not really bad unless you're an asshole streamer and your viewers are autistic monkeys.
All the Hammer Time decks that would try to kill you.
Turn 3 is too slow. No. These old Hammer Time decks literally killed me on turn 2 more than a time or two. And they did that anyway. Turn 3 is not too slow. Uro comes down on 3, you gain 3 life. Oh my god, how can Burn survive you gaining 3 life on turn 3? Jesus Christ. It's like timely reinforcements has never existed. Oh, and that gave me tokens. But no, Uro giving you 3 life? Oh my god. Jesus Christ. Burn is unplayable. No, it wasn't. Burn was literally pushed out by Hammer Time and Prowess, and MTG Top 8 completely backs that up. Burn had a pretty good matchup against the Uro decks. Maybe not the 4-color one, because Omnath was fucking insane. And again, that deck had too much, and I've said that a million times. I'm not going to mention it anymore. So yeah, oops, all spells existed before Uro. You had the fucking I forget what it was, the artifact deck, that Sam Black popularized that had like a fucking 90% win rate. Dredge has existed forever. Dredge used to be a really complex and interesting combo deck, but then Wizards decided, hey, you know what? We don't want people to play interesting combo decks. We just want our combo decks to be straightforward piles. So we're going to print Prized Amalgam and a couple other cards, and we're going to make it really good. And then we're going to ban stuff from it because fuck old cards. But that's more of a WotC problem than anything. Card advantage is nothing compared to winning. Exactly, but card advantage can help you not die on turn 2 to the aggro decks that already exist. This is an idiotic point, and I can't believe he made it, but, you know.
Now we have another possible. Dredge, you know, sneak and show.
Yeah, I'm sick of this shit. Okay, now we will. Not a problem. Not
you know, all in mono red aggro.
He mentions Legacy, but Legacy's always had combo decks. I don't know why he's talking about Legacy. Those decks have always existed. Magic is basically a degenerate game from the start. I mean, not the actual start, but like, I want to say Urza's Saga, the set. I mean, the combo decks that have tried to kill you as quickly as possible have always existed. That's an idiotic point to mention Legacy. And decks like Infect, old Infect used to kill you on turn 2 in Modern. So this is, again, a stupid point. It has literally nothing to do with control decks because control was never playable in Modern. So yeah, these types of decks always exist. It's absolutely idiotic that he mentions this as to why control should never be tier 1. These decks exist right now. He's either an idiot or dishonest. I don't actually think that Yama is an idiot, so he's being facetious. Okay. He's just being, he's just wrong. Like, these decks exist now, and they've always existed. This is a terrible point. Like, there's no good points in this aside that 4-color control had too much going for it. That's the only point that I'll agree with. And I know he made a little power presentation, and I'm just recording this on Streamlabs, but like, I don't fucking care. I don't have time to do this shit. This is not my job.
Try and kill your opponent as quickly as possible,
always
so none of they.
It's always existed in the format. This is not even worth going over. It has always existed. Blowout cards have always existed. I will.
Don't have lands in play, so I'm going to play this card that just makes it so my opponent doesn't get to play the game.
Yep.
Those cards are also
always existed.
It's not very fun to play against because
they're not, but they've always existed.
They're really black and white cards in the sense that.
But when it exists to stop an aggro deck that will skull fuck you to death on turn 2, or a combo deck that will kill you on turn 2 or 3, nobody bats an eye. They just accept it. But when it exists to stop a control deck that might kill you earliest by turn 7, suddenly there's a problem. Suddenly there's a fucking problem. Even though they have these cheap, efficient ways to completely wreck you, there's a problem when you have to do it against a control deck. Why is that a problem? When the control deck, at earliest, might kill you by turn 7. Why is that a problem? Why is this a problem? Yama, tell us.
Play it and it resolves. Your opponent doesn't play.
Spoiler: he won't tell us why it's a problem.
The game. Okay, if I have to play a card so drastic as Boil or Choke, and when they get countered, most likely I'm not playing the game because the game's over because I need it.
Right. But if I'm playing against Affinity and I don't get the Stony Silence on turn 2, I'm talking classic heyday Affinity, I'm probably dead. If I'm playing against Dredge and I don't aggressively mull to multiple copies of Rest in Peace because, fuck, they have interaction to blow up my Rest in Peace, I'm probably going to die.
Did such a drastic.
And I'm going to die a lot fucking faster than I'd die if I was playing Jund against Snow Control, where I don't even really need the Boil, but it's like a nice exclamation point.
Card in the matchup to really make it so that they can't play it either, because I cannot win a game which that they're playing.
If I'm playing against Tron, I almost can do nothing, by the way, because we weren't allowed to have counterspell until just now.
Most of the time. So it's just not fun to play these cards that are just like, okay, win the game.
It's not fun to play a format where everybody's trying to kill you as quickly as possible, And then whenever there's a deck that comes up and is like, hold on a minute. And they did this with Old Jun too. They're like, oh, we got to ban everything and make the fair interactive decks terrible. It's not so much, it's any time that there's a fair interactive deck that can keep this degenerate bullshit in check. That's when they ban it. Most of the bans are to stop fair interactive decks because people bitch and cry and whine when Jund is the top of the meta, or Blue Red Splinter Twin is the top of the meta, or Pod is the top of the meta, or Snow Control is the top of the meta, or 4-color control. But nobody complains when Tron's at the top, or Infect's at the top, or Hammer Time's at the top, or Luris Bullshit's at the top, or Cascade Living End is at the top. No, that's fine, and we all have to accept it and move on with our lives and adapt to their degenerate, outright degenerate, literally game-breaking bullshit.
Game, like, it makes sense more in a matchup that's like, let's say, mono red versus.
Why does it make more sense?
Versus blue-white control if someone has circle protection red.
An unplayable card that saw no play in Modern. He's using terrible examples.
Or let's say Oops All Spells versus some controlling deck and they have Rest in Peace.
Slightly better example.
That's a little bit different because
no,
it's an all-in combo deck. You expect to have these one-hit KO cards because they're trying to hit one-hit KO you as well.
Right. Okay, so they're trying to kill me as quickly as possible. So I have cards that say no, you can't do that. If I hit them, how is that fun gameplay? Right? So if I'm playing a control deck where you have access to cards that will literally just stop me from playing the game, multiple cards. You have Choke, not as good. You have Boil, pretty good. And you had Ashiok, the best. But I'm not killing you by turn 2, turn 3. The earliest I can usually kill you is turn 7. Why is that a problem? That's a lot more fun and interesting gameplay than what he just described. It's so much more fun and back and forth and interesting when it's two interactive decks that have a hate card, where one has really strong hate cards to just blow you out. It's still more interesting than I'm playing against Dredge. I gotta have my Rest in Peace and my Ley Lines. I'm playing against Affinity. I gotta have my Stony Silence and my Board Wipes. That's still fucking way more interesting than all of the shit that he just described.
Well, when you see Boil and Choke in these one-hit KO cards out of mid-range decks or potentially like aggro-leaning decks, it's really not where you want things to be.
No, you do. Because those decks have tools to stop the deck that goes over them. That's exactly where you want to fucking be. Your slower decks have tools to combat the slower decks that go bigger than them. That's exactly what you want. That's how a fucking healthy meta is created. You idiot. Oh, fuck. I do everything on a laptop. Anyway, that's exactly what you want. That's a healthy meta.
You want things to be ebb and flow. You want back and forth. You don't want I win or I lose cards because...
Yes! That's why you want the control decks to be at the top. You fool. That's why you want control to be tier 1. That's exactly why you want it to be tier 1 and not say Dredge.
Those are not particularly fun to do. They're not very complex, challenging for deck building or gameplay. It's just...
It is challenging for deck building and gameplay. Do I tap out to play my Uro? Oh, surprise Boil, motherfucker. Or surprise Ashiok. You're done. Goodbye. That's fair. To me, that's fair. If I'm playing that type of deck, that I know that if I go long enough, I'm going to completely steamroll anything that gets in my way. If they have tools that can completely blow me out, I'm going to play better. It's more on point. If they can't compete with me going long, at least they have some way to balance it out. As opposed to these stupid all-in linear decks where you need the interaction as early as possible or you just die. And he just fucking doesn't get that. This gameplay scenario may not be ideal, but it is infinitely better than what we have to deal with now, where we play Chalice or we die. Or Rest in Peace, or we die, or Stony Silence. Any example through the past 10 years. it is still infinitely more interesting. The gameplay is infinitely more interesting than the stupid all-in combo deck example he gives.
Just kind of, as I call the face rule cards. It's just, okay, play my spell. Oh, you didn't.
Yeah, we're done.
Opinion as well. So,
what is a fair control deck? A shitty one, in your opinion, Yama. A deck that targets metagame inefficiencies. There are no inefficiencies now, motherfuckers. There ain't any inefficiencies now. Wizards make goddamn sure of that. Modern Horizons 2 made sure that control was never fucking playable again in any form that resembles actual control. Has good and bad matchups. Nope. Fair decks should have 50-50 against the fucking field. They should. They should always have a 50-50 matchup. If not higher than that. Nobody bats an eye when Jund has a 50-50. That's ideal for these types of decks. Not centralized win conditions is a completely idiotic point. It's not even a point. Lurrus decks all play more or less the same cards now. The mid-range decks all play the same cards now. Like Monkey's everywhere, DRC is everywhere, Murktide is everywhere, Cascade bullshit is everywhere. This is completely idiotic. Good players play the best cards in their decks if they can play those cards, if those cards fit with their strategy. So this is idiotic. This is like saying you don't want centralized removal. Okay, so I'm going to exclude Lightning Bolt, even though it's the best red card, or the second best red removal spell now. Unholy Heat's the best red removal spell. And I'm going to exclude that because I don't want my deck to have a centralized answer. It's retarded. This is not a point. This is a nothing statement here. No, fair decks I don't believe should have bad matchups. I think they should be pretty even keel against everything. That's the ideal. This is completely idiotic. A deck that targets metagame inefficiencies is also terrible, because then it's not good against other decks that will beat the absolute shit out of it. So you see what I'm saying? And this mentality only applies to control decks, by the way. It doesn't apply to the aggro decks, which skullfuck everyone. It doesn't apply to mid-range. It only applies to blue control.
With all that being said, what I don't like about the tier 1 control deck, what is a control deck that I think...
I'm not listening to this idiot ramble more about this. I'm going to show his example of a fair control deck that he ripped from Paul Cheon, I think it was Paul Cheon. Where is it at, Yama? Come here, you fucker. You elaborate too much on this, Yama, and it's complete bullshit. Where's the list? Control decks at their best. Here we go.
And
4 fucking years ago.
Really dominant, changes colors, answers, threats, shifts, all these things that I'm continually talking about.
Fucking hands, dude. Okay. Not overly dominant, changes colors. Why is that relevant? That's fucking idiotic. That's idiotic. Burn doesn't change colors, Yama. Jund doesn't change colors, Yama. What are you even talking about? It doesn't mean anything. He's just saying stuff that doesn't mean anything. So this is a Paul Cheon deck. This deck is a fucking pile of dog shit. Okay? And he's gonna say that he's like, oh, I played a deck that targeted the meta. I'll just let him talk.
And, before we actually get into my final thing, it's important to have all these things go...
It's not his fucking deck, by the way.
...together, because if it's not, you're going to be looking at...
Targets metagames. No. It's not overly dominant. 4-color was not even overly dominant. Hammer Time, Cascade, both versions of Cascade, and Blue-Red all have higher win rates than 4-color Control did. They all do. Right now. Right fucking now. Okay. And I say 4-color because it was overall the best Control deck ever in Modern. But 4 decks right now all have higher win rates. Yama's not crying about those, though. And that's a big fucking problem. Changes colors, answers, and threats to shifts in meta. No, you don't need a deck to fucking change colors. I don't get it. Answers, yeah, okay, but how come the win conditions are not allowed to be centralized, but the answers can be? You see what I'm saying? It makes no sense with his other point.
These old decks that are just...
Point.
Okay, I'm going to be playing the 4 best
Yama
super.
doesn't make any actual...
my counter...
Yama doesn't make any actual good points in this. He's just saying shit that the usual viewer will like, and they'll clap their little hands like a bunch of trained monkeys. and the Reddit crowd will probably like this as well. But he doesn't. The only point that he makes is that at the time, 4-color control had too many things going for it, which I've said since the start of 4-color control.
Top, I'm going to play my Uro Omnath. I'm going to play these prison elements and things that just don't allow my opponent to play. You want a back and forth. When you don't have back and forth in games of Magic and you just have one person face rolling another, I personally think it's not fun, not interactive.
All right. This is exactly why control decks need to be at the top of the meta. If anything, this is an argument why control should be tier 1. Because that's when you get back and forth games, as opposed to the goddamn face roll, fuck you, I win meta that we have right now. That's all we have right now. The meta's completely inbred dog shit. That's what Modern always was throughout the history of Modern. Anytime that there was an interactive deck, Jund with, what the fuck's his name? The little elf dude. The Planeswalker elf. He was not really a Planeswalker, but you know what I'm talking about. Banned. Bloodbraid Elf banned. Splinter Twin banned. Pod banned. Any deck like that always got banned. It's always been the linear decks have been allowed to run rampant and do whatever the fuck they want.
In a way that is enjoyable and just kind of...
Interactive decks have always been the most targeted for bans because they're interactive. Because they played the way that everybody wants to play, but when one of those decks is at the top, almost everybody cries and whines and complains. And then the format goes back to being an absolute shitfest.
Unenjoyable. And that's why I think certain tier 1 decks should not be specifically control decks that have these elements.
Tier 1 should always be controlled because it allows for the most diverse, interactive, back and forth gameplay of any archetype. And another good one that can be tier 1 is Jund. But when control is tier 1, you bet your ass Jund is right there with it. Because Jund, the way that deck plays so well with and against control decks. And then there's decks that are good against Jund. And then there's decks that are bad against Jund, but are really good at beating up the control deck. And this is where you get your back and forth meta that everybody supposedly wants. But then when we have it, they all cry like little bitches.
That are not particularly fun to play against. And with all that being said, let's get into my final thing. I actually won my first ever MTGO event with a control deck. Was it tier 1? No, people thought this deck was tier 2.
No, they didn't, because this is right at the time Death Shadow was skull fucking everyone. And Path, really good against Death Shadow. Supreme Verdict, really good against Death Shadow. So yeah, this isn't even his fucking deck. This is a Paul Cheon deck, for fuck's sake. I don't know what he's fucking talking about. Yeah, like this is not even his goddamn deck.
Possibly even tier 3. But I played this deck, and I went 10-0 in an event, and I won, and I was very happy. This deck.
Congratulations. You beat up Death Shadow, which is why Blue-White Control actually was a deck for a little bit. Given how he usually plays control decks, I'm surprised he won anything. Especially with this. Not to mention, this is from 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, when the format was much fucking weaker. And you could actually play something like this. Yeah. Let's look at Doom Switch's Miracles list at the end. And how that deck never fucking did anything in Modern. I'll cover that. Let's see how powerful that is. And that didn't really win challenges or anything. I don't think Mystic Miracles ever won a challenge. Ever. Yeah. Yama, you're fucking, like, wrong. And the only reason that Waffo did anything with Blue-White is because Chalice. He got lucky and played Chalice. If you don't get the Chalice, you lose. It's the same principle, but now you have to play the hate main deck. And I've even seen people play Rest in Peace main deck now. And that's a god-awful sign for a format where you have to play Rest in Peace main deck. Let alone Chalice. But we had to play both of them to have a chance. You know your format's fucked. I don't care what anybody says. Go ahead and try to argue it. You're an idiot.
Some things that people were not thinking about. You know, people were very into creature.
He's gonna try to make it like this is his idea. It's not.
Removal, very into heavily attacking on the creature front. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to play 2 Snapcasts, 2 Albums. Very little creatures. I'm going to play these Planeswalker threats.
This pissed me off because I know goddamn well this was not his deck. This has existed for a while at this point. So this annoyed me because he's taking credit for a deck that already existed. And he's acting like he did some revolutionary thing. No, you just picked it up and you played it, dude.
Count, hard to take off the battlefield. I'm going to play some of these possibly weird interaction points, spreading seas, attack people's mana bases that are possibly getting a little bit greedy. Things like this. This is a perfect control deck that I would love to be in the metagame.
No. Decks like this are shit. That's why he wants them to be in a meta deck, in the metagame. There's just like, if there's something that you can beat up on, then like, cool. If not, then you get skull fucked by Tron or whatever. Yeah. This deck it was never that good. It never won anything. Blue-white control has literally one challenge, or one GP win, and that was in the Hogak era. Yeah, in the modern format, it's got one GP win. So overpowered are control decks, and historically they're just so. Oh no, they're not. No, they're not. It's one big win. Challenge wins. To my knowledge, blue-white control has never fucking won a challenge, except okay, Mystic Miracles never won a challenge. Wafo Tapa won a challenge with Chalice control. So Wafa got lucky, landed his chalices when he needed to, and then he won. That's cool. But GPs, one GP win. So I'm thinking GPs are at a higher level than MTGO.
Attack.
But that's multiple more players. So challenges are like the bread and butter of where you base your opinions on for how good a deck is. Which is why, like, when I tell you that Hammer Time, Blue-Red, Murktide, and both Cascade decks all have a higher win percentage than 4-color control did in its heyday, and that Blue-Red Prowess and Black-Red Lurish Shadows had about the same win rate as 4-color control back in its heyday, and Hammer Time did as well. So I'm telling you that deck was not... It's questionable as to whether it was overpowered. It did push out other mid-range decks, but were other mid-range decks even able to compete is the question. The answer is probably no.
Attacks in a way that people do not expect, necessarily. Attacks in a way that really targets how a metagame is turning.
Yeah, shut the fuck up, Yama. You're pissing me off now. I want to wrap this up. Get to his little...
Watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video as much as I...
Okay, so this whole video was retarded. He made no points. Not any valid points. The only one being that maybe 4-color control had too much going on. My counter is, were other slow decks even playable? In summary, the format's always been a degenerate fucking kill you as quickly as possible slugfest. Those exist no matter how good control is in any fucking given meta. So I don't see the problem here. The meta that he described, being back and forth interactive, is exactly why control decks should always be tier 1. That's exactly why. And he basically, if you just look at what he says, he made the argument for me. So this was interesting. I should do more of these, because I've not really enjoyed my time playing Arena that much. So yeah, I think I will make more of these in the future. But y'all finally got a video, so that's cool. It's been a minute. This is literally my one dislike. And then there's a bunch of comments. Of course, Yama has not responded. But anyway, yep, there's my response video to Yama Killer. Let's wrap this shit up, because I'm pretty sure, yeah, my response video was an hour. Oh, God, I talk a lot. All right, we're done. Have a good one.